The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Training Compound in Coronado, California. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her flight suit one final time before stepping onto the tarmac, where a group of Navy SEALs waited near their transport helicopter. At 28, she had already logged over 2,000 flight hours and earned her reputation as one of the most skilled helicopter pilots in the Navy, but today would mark her first joint operation with SEAL Team 6. The mission briefing had been straightforward enough. Intelligence suggested a high-value target was operating from a compound in the mountains of Afghanistan. Sarah's job was simple in concept, but demanding in execution. Insert the team under cover of darkness, provide close air support if needed, and extract them safely. What made this mission different was the terrain and the timeline. The landing zone sat at 8,000 feet elevation, surrounded by peaks that rose another 4,000 feet higher, creating a natural funnel that would challenge even the most experienced pilots. As Sarah approached the group of operators, she noticed their casual confidence, the way they moved with practiced efficiency while checking their gear. These weren't ordinary soldiers. Each man represented years of training, countless missions, and survival through situations that would break most people. She had worked with special operations forces before, but SEAL Team 6 operated at a level that demanded absolute precision from everyone involved, including their pilots. The team leader, a man called Jake Reaper Morrison, stood slightly apart from the others, studying satellite images on a tablet. His weathered face and calm demeanor spoke of someone who had seen combat in every major theater over the past decade. When Sarah was introduced to the team during the pre-flight briefing, Morrison had given her a polite nod, nothing more. She understood the dynamic. Until she proved herself in their world, she would remain an outsider, regardless of her credentials. The other team members introduced themselves with their operational call signs: Ghost, Hammer, Phoenix, and Vortex. Each name carried stories she could only imagine. Ghost, the team's communications specialist, appeared young but moved with the deliberate precision of someone who had learned that carelessness meant death. Hammer served as the heavy weapons expert, his massive frame seeming almost too large for the helicopter they would soon board. Phoenix handled explosives and breaching, while Vortex operated as the team medic, though Sarah suspected his medical training represented only a fraction of his capabilities. The sixth member of the team was Tommy Ace Rodriguez, the newest addition to the unit. Unlike the others, who maintained professional distance, Ace seemed determined to test every boundary he encountered. During the equipment check, he made comments about women in combat roles that walked the line between humor and disrespect. The other team members largely ignored him, but Sarah noticed the subtle tension his attitude created. As they completed their final preparations, Ace approached Sarah with a smirk that immediately put her on guard. He had the swagger of someone who believed his own reputation protected him from consequences, and his next words confirmed her assessment of his character. "So, sweetheart," he said, loud enough for the entire team to hear. "What's your call sign? Shouldn't you have something cute like Angel or Princess? Something that fits better with ferrying us real warriors around." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt the weight of every eye on her, measuring her response. This moment would define how the team viewed her throughout the mission. She could respond with anger, which would confirm any preconceptions about emotional female pilots. She could ignore the comment, which might be interpreted as weakness. Or she could meet the challenge directly. Sarah turned to face Ace, her expression calm but her eyes sharp as steel. The nickname she carried had been earned through actions that few people knew about, missions that remained classified years after their completion. It represented a moment when she had been forced to make a choice between following orders and doing what was right, and the consequences had shaped her career ever since. "Viper 1, she said simply, her voice carrying none of the defensiveness Ace had probably expected. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Ghost stopped what he was doing and looked up sharply. Hammer actually took a step back, his expression changing from casual interest to something approaching respect. Phoenix whistled low under his breath, and even Morrison raised his head from the tablet to study Sarah with new attention. Ace's smirk faded as he processed the implications of what he had just heard. In the special operations community, certain call signs carried weight beyond their simple words. They represented actions, missions, and moments that defined careers, and sometimes changed the course of conflicts. Viper 1 was one of those legendary designations, spoken of in quiet conversations and classified briefings. The story behind the call sign had become something of a legend within military aviation circles. 3 years earlier, during a mission in Syria, A helicopter pilot had single-handedly extracted a compromised intelligence team from behind enemy lines. The extraction had required flying through a gauntlet of surface-to-air missiles, hostile aircraft, and ground fire that should have been impossible to survive. The pilot had not only completed the mission but had also engaged enemy positions during the extraction, neutralizing threats with precision that had saved dozens of American lives. What made the story remarkable was not just the successful mission, but the circumstances surrounding it. The pilot had been ordered to abort the extraction when the situation became untenable, but had chosen to disobey direct orders to save the team on the ground. The decision had resulted in a successful rescue but had also led to disciplinary action and a transfer away from frontline operations. The pilot's career had suffered, but the call sign had stuck, representing someone who would sacrifice personal advancement to do what was right. Morrison was the first to break the silence. "You're that Viper one?" he asked, his tone carrying a mixture of surprise and something that might have been admiration. Sarah nodded once, not elaborating. She had learned long ago that her actions spoke louder than any explanation she might offer. The men around her were processing this information, recalibrating their assumptions about the woman who would be responsible for their lives during the mission. Ace, meanwhile, looked like he wanted to disappear into the tarmac. His casual arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that he had just mocked someone whose reputation exceeded his own. In the hierarchy of special operations, respect was earned through actions under fire, and Sarah's credentials in that area were beyond question. Ghost approached Sarah, his expression serious. "Ma'am, I worked intelligence support on the Syria extraction," he said quietly. "I was in the operations center when you made that run. I've never seen anything like it." Sarah acknowledged his comment with a slight nod, but didn't elaborate on the details. The mission remained classified, and even among these operators, there were limits to what could be discussed. But Ghost's recognition served as validation for the others, confirmation that the legend they had heard whispered in briefing rooms and ready areas was standing right in front of them. The dynamic within the team shifted noticeably. Where there had been polite professionalism before, there was now genuine interest and respect. These men understood what it meant to put everything on the line for your teammates, and they recognized that quality in Sarah. Her willingness to risk her career to save lives resonated with warriors who live by the principle that no one gets left behind. Morrison stepped forward, his entire demeanor changed. "Viper One, we're honored to have you flying this mission," he said formally. Then, with a slight smile, he added, "And we're damn glad you're on our side." The pre-flight briefing took on a different tone after the revelation of Sarah's identity. Instead of the careful politeness typically extended to support personnel, the SEALs began treating her as an integral part of the team. They shared tactical details that they might have kept to themselves before, understanding that her experience made her more than just a taxi service. Sarah found herself appreciating the change, even as she remained focused on the mission ahead. These men represented the elite of the elite, and their acceptance meant something. But, more importantly, their trust would make the mission more effective. When operators and pilots worked together as a true team, rather than separate elements forced to coordinate, the results were always better. As they boarded the helicopter, Sarah noticed that Ace kept his distance, clearly embarrassed by his earlier behavior. She didn't hold grudges, but she also didn't go out of her way to make him comfortable. In her experience, people learned more from their mistakes when they had to live with the consequences for a while. The flight to the target area would take 3 hours, crossing some of the most challenging terrain on Earth. Sarah had studied the route extensively, identifying potential landing zones, escape routes, and defensive positions. The mission profile called for a low-level approach to avoid radar detection, followed by a rapid insertion at the target landing zone. As the helicopter lifted off from Coronado, Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with the beginning of every mission. Behind her, 6 of America's most elite warriors prepared for whatever awaited them in the mountains of Afghanistan. But now, instead of being an outsider providing transportation, she was Viper One, an integral part of a team that understood the stakes and trusted each other completely. The revelation of her call sign had changed everything. What had begun as a routine transport mission had become something more personal, a chance to prove once again that when lives hung in the balance, she would do whatever was necessary to bring her people home. The mountains ahead held unknown dangers, but Sarah Mitchell had faced worse odds before and emerged victorious. As the California coastline disappeared behind them and the vast Pacific Ocean stretched ahead, Sarah began her mental preparation for the mission to come. The next time her feet touched American soil, she would either be celebrating another successful operation or dealing with consequences that would reshape all their lives forever. The flight across the Pacific Ocean gave Sarah time to reflect on the events that had led to her current assignment. 3 years had passed since the Syria mission that had earned her the call sign Viper 1. But the memories remained as vivid as if they had happened yesterday. That mission had changed the trajectory of her career in ways she was still discovering, creating both opportunities and obstacles that continued to shape her military service. The Syria operation had begun as a routine intelligence gathering mission. A small team of CIA operatives and military intelligence specialists had been inserted into the country to gather information on weapons trafficking networks. Sarah had been part of the aviation support package, flying a modified Black Hawk helicopter equipped with advanced surveillance equipment. Her role was supposed to be simple: provide aerial reconnaissance and be ready for emergency extraction if needed. Everything had gone wrong simultaneously. The intelligence team had been compromised within hours of insertion, their position betrayed by a double agent who had been feeding information to hostile forces. By the time the team realized their situation, they were surrounded by enemy fighters and had no clear route to the designated extraction point. Even worse, hostile aircraft were en route to their position, meaning any rescue attempt would face overwhelming odds. The mission commander had made the decision that haunted Sarah's career: abort the extraction and withdraw all assets to preserve operational security. From a strategic perspective, the order made sense. Risking additional lives to save a compromised team could result in an even greater loss. The intelligence team understood the risks when they accepted the mission, and they were prepared to face the consequences of discovery. Sarah had been flying Overwatch when the abort order came through her headset. Below her, she could see the muzzle flashes as the surrounded team fought desperately to survive. Her fuel was sufficient for extraction, and her aircraft was equipped with weapons systems that could provide the covering fire needed to reach the team. But her orders were explicit: return to base immediately and prepare for possible retaliation strikes. The next few minutes had defined everything that followed in her military career. Sarah had listened to the radio chatter from the team below, hearing the fear and desperation in their voices as they realized they had been abandoned. These weren't statistics or strategic considerations. They were real people with families and futures that would be cut short if she followed orders and left them to die. She had made her choice without consulting anyone, banking the helicopter sharply and diving toward the enemy positions surrounding the intelligence team. The decision violated direct orders, military protocol, and basic operational security. It also represented the kind of split-second decision that separated heroes from statistics in the unforgiving mathematics of war. The extraction had required flying through a gauntlet of hostile fire that should have destroyed her aircraft within minutes. Surface-to-air missiles streaked past her windscreen, while automatic weapons fire sparked off her armored hull. Sarah had responded by becoming something more than a pilot. She had become a weapon, using her aircraft's systems to systematically eliminate the threats surrounding the team below. The mission lasted only 18 minutes from the time she disobeyed orders until the extracted team was safely aboard her aircraft. In that brief span, Sarah had destroyed 3 enemy vehicles, neutralized 2 weapons positions, and successfully extracted all 7 members of the intelligence team. Her aircraft had suffered significant damage, and she had been forced to make an emergency landing at a forward operating base, but everyone had survived. The aftermath had been complicated in ways that Sarah was still navigating. Officially, she had saved 7 American lives and prevented a significant intelligence loss. The mission had been deemed a success, and the intelligence gathered by the rescued team had led to the disruption of major weapons trafficking networks. Unofficially, she had violated direct orders and created a diplomatic incident that had required months of careful management. Her commanding officers had been placed in an impossible position. They couldn't court-martial a pilot who had successfully rescued American personnel, but they also couldn't ignore the fact that she had directly disobeyed orders. The compromise had been a formal reprimand accompanied by reassignment to a training command, effectively ending her combat flying career. The call sign, Viper 1, had emerged from that mission, representing both the deadly effectiveness she had displayed and the consequences of her actions. Among pilots and special operations personnel, the name carried respect and admiration. Among senior officers and Pentagon planners, it represented a reminder of what happened when individuals decided they knew better than their commanders. For 3 years, Sarah had accepted her assignment to the training command, working with new pilots and refining tactics that others would use in combat. She had told herself that teaching the next generation was important work, and in many ways it was. But she had never stopped wanting to return to operational flying, to be part of missions that mattered beyond training scores and evaluation reports. The opportunity had come through unexpected channels. Morrison's team had specifically requested her for this mission, using their considerable influence to bypass normal assignment procedures. Apparently, Ghost's presence during the Syria extraction had not been the only connection between SEAL Team 6 and her previous mission. Several team members had worked operations where Sarah's extraction had provided crucial intelligence, and they understood the value of having a pilot who would do whatever was necessary to complete the mission. The irony was not lost on Sarah that her willingness to disobey orders had ultimately led to this opportunity to prove herself once again. The military was an institution built on discipline and following orders, but it was also an organization that recognized the value of individuals who could think independently when circumstances demanded it. As the helicopter crossed into international airspace, Sarah began reviewing the mission parameters once more. The target compound sat in a valley that presented significant challenges for both insertion and extraction. The surrounding peaks created natural wind patterns that would make flying dangerous even under ideal conditions. Add the possibility of hostile fire, and the mission profile pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable risk. The intelligence team behind them was reviewing their own preparations, but Sarah noticed the change in their demeanor since learning her identity. Where before they had been polite but distant, now they engaged her as an equal, asking for her input on approach routes and contingency planning. Morrison in particular seemed interested in her assessment of the tactical situation. "What's your read on the landing zone?" Morrison asked, settling into the seat next to Sarah's position. Sarah pulled up the aerial photographs on her tablet, pointing to the various features that would affect their approach. "It's manageable, but barely," she said honestly. "The valley creates a natural funnel that will amplify any wind patterns. If we face hostile fire during insertion, our options for evasive maneuvering will be limited." Morrison nodded, appreciating her direct assessment. "What about extraction under pressure?" "That depends on how much pressure," Sarah replied. "If you're taking heavy fire, I can get in and out quickly, but you'll need to be ready to move fast. If we face organized resistance with heavy weapons, we might need to consider alternate extraction points." The conversation continued for another hour, covering various scenarios and contingency plans. Sarah found herself impressed by the thoroughness of Morrison's preparation and the way he incorporated her input into the team's planning. This was military teamwork at its best, with each member contributing their expertise to maximize the chances of mission success. As they approached the midpoint of their journey, Sarah received an encrypted communication from Mission Control. The intelligence picture had changed slightly, with updated information about enemy movement in the target area. The changes weren't significant enough to abort the mission, but they required tactical adjustments that would make an already challenging operation even more complex. Sarah discussed the updates with Morrison, and together they revised their approach plan. The new intelligence suggested that enemy forces had been reinforced in the past 24 hours, meaning the team might face more organized resistance than originally anticipated. This information would normally have resulted in mission postponement, but the time-sensitive nature of their target made delay impossible. The team's response to the updated threat assessment revealed their professional caliber. Instead of expressing concern or requesting additional support, they simply adjusted their plans to account for the new information. These men had operated in similar circumstances before, and they understood that uncertainty was a constant factor in their line of work. Ace, who had been notably quiet since his earlier embarrassment, finally approached Sarah during a brief pause in the planning session. "Ma'am," he began awkwardly, "I wanted to apologize for my comments earlier. I was out of line." Sarah studied his face, gauging the sincerity of his words. Military culture could be harsh on those who made mistakes, but it also valued genuine accountability. Ace appeared to understand the magnitude of his error and was taking responsibility for it. "Apology accepted," she said simply. "But remember that your attitude affects team cohesion. In our line of work, trust isn't optional." Ace nodded seriously, and Sarah could see that the lesson had been learned. The young operator would likely be more thoughtful about his assumptions and comments in the future, which would benefit both him and any teams he worked with. As the helicopter continued its journey toward the target area, Sarah felt the familiar pre-mission focus settling over the team. Conversations became more tactical, movements more deliberate, and everyone began the mental preparation necessary for what lay ahead. These final hours of travel were crucial for building the mindset needed to perform under extreme stress. The sun was beginning to set as they approached the final waypoint before entering potentially hostile airspace. Sarah began her final equipment checks, ensuring that all systems were functioning properly and that her weapons were ready for immediate use. Behind her, the SEAL team conducted their own final preparations, checking weapons, communications gear, and medical supplies. The mission was entering its most dangerous phase, where planning would meet reality and where split-second decisions would determine success or failure. Sarah had been in this situation many times before, but each mission carried its own unique challenges and risks. The team's confidence in her abilities was both encouraging and sobering, representing trust that she was determined to honor. As they crossed into the operational area, Sarah knew that the next few hours would test everything she had learned about flying, leadership, and courage. The mountains ahead held unknown dangers, but they also held the opportunity to prove once again that Viper 1 could deliver when it mattered most. The mountains of Afghanistan rose before them like ancient sentinels, their snow-capped peaks catching the last rays of sunlight as darkness began to settle over the landscape. Sarah had flown over similar terrain countless times during her career, but each approach into hostile territory carried its own unique tension. The helicopter moved silently through the thin air, its specially modified engines running quieter than standard aircraft to avoid detection by enemy listening posts. As they penetrated deeper into the operational area, Sarah's instruments began picking up the electronic signatures that indicated they were entering a contested environment. Radar sweeps painted brief contacts on her threat warning systems before moving on, suggesting that enemy forces maintained surveillance capabilities in the region. The intelligence briefing had warned them to expect surface-to-air missile systems, but the reality of facing those threats always carried more weight than any briefing could convey. Morrison moved forward to coordinate with Sarah as they approached the initial checkpoint. The team's insertion would take place at a landing zone approximately 15 kilometers from their target, requiring them to move overland through challenging terrain, while Sarah maintained overwatch from a concealed position. The plan called for radio silence until the team reached their objective, at which point Sarah would move to support the extraction. Checkpoint Alpha in sight, Sarah reported quietly, identifying the geographical marker that confirmed their position. The valley below them appeared empty of human activity, but experience had taught her that appearances could be deceiving in this region. Enemy forces had become experts at concealment and camouflage, turning the landscape itself into a weapon against unwary intruders. The approach to the landing zone required descending into a narrow valley that would limit their options for evasive maneuvering. Sarah had studied the terrain extensively, but actually flying through the confined space proved even more challenging than the satellite imagery had suggested. Crosswinds created by the surrounding peaks buffeted the helicopter, requiring constant corrections to maintain course and altitude. As they descended toward the designated landing zone, Sarah's night vision equipment revealed details that had been invisible from higher altitude. The area appeared suitable for landing, with relatively level ground and adequate space for the helicopter to set down safely. More importantly, there were no visible signs of enemy activity, suggesting that their approach had gone undetected. The insertion itself took less than 30 seconds. Sarah brought the helicopter to a hover just above the rocky ground, while Morrison's team quickly exited through the side doors. Each operator moved with practiced efficiency, disappearing into the surrounding terrain within moments of touching down. Sarah lifted off immediately, climbing away from the landing zone and heading toward her designated overwatch position. The overwatch location had been carefully selected to provide good visibility of the target area while offering concealment for the helicopter. Sarah settled into a hover behind a ridgeline that masked her position from ground-based observers while maintaining line-of-sight communications with the team. From this position, she could respond quickly if extraction became necessary, while remaining hidden from hostile forces. The next 3 hours passed slowly as Morrison's team moved through the mountains toward their objective. Sarah maintained radio monitoring, listening for any transmissions that might indicate the team had encountered problems. The silence was both reassuring and nerve-wracking, suggesting that the team was proceeding according to plan while leaving her without information about their current status. During the wait, Sarah had time to reflect on the complexity of the mission they were executing. Intelligence operations in this region required coordination between multiple agencies and military units, each bringing specialized capabilities to achieve objectives that no single organization could accomplish alone. Her role was crucial but limited, providing the aviation support that allowed the ground team to operate in areas otherwise beyond their reach. At 0230 hours local time, Sarah received the communication she had been waiting for. Morrison's voice came through her headset with the calm professionalism that marked experienced operators under pressure. Viper 1, this is Team Leader. We are approaching the objective. Request you move to support position Bravo. Sarah immediately began her repositioning flight, moving the helicopter to a location that would allow rapid response if the team needed emergency extraction. The new position offered better approach routes to the target compound, but exposed her to greater risk of detection. The balance between providing effective support and maintaining security was a constant calculation in operations like this. As Sarah moved into position, Morrison's team began their approach to the target compound. Intelligence had suggested the location housed a high-value target involved in coordinating attacks against coalition forces. The team's mission was to capture or eliminate this individual while gathering any intelligence materials found at the site. The compound itself was larger than the aerial photographs had suggested, with multiple buildings connected by covered walkways. The layout indicated careful planning by whoever had constructed it, with defensive positions and escape routes that would complicate any assault. Morrison's team would need to move quickly and decisively to prevent their target from escaping or destroying valuable intelligence. Sarah monitored the team's communications as they established overwatch positions around the compound. Each operator reported his position and readiness status, building a complete picture of the tactical situation. The professionalism and coordination displayed by the team impressed Sarah, even though she had worked with elite units before. SEAL Team 6 represented the pinnacle of special operations capability, and their performance reflected years of training and experience. The assault began at precisely 0245 hours with coordinated breaches of the compound's main entrances. Sarah could hear the distinctive sounds of flashbang grenades and automatic weapons fire through her headset, indicating that the team had encountered resistance. The intensity of the gunfire suggested that the enemy force was larger and better prepared than intelligence had indicated. Viper 1, be advised we have heavy contact at the objective, Morrison reported, his voice remaining calm despite the obvious stress of the situation. Multiple enemy combatants, well-armed and organized. We may need extraction support. Sarah immediately began her approach toward the compound, knowing that the team might need close air support or emergency extraction. The helicopter's weapons systems came online as she prepared for potential engagement, while her night vision equipment revealed the chaos unfolding at the target site. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as Morrison's team fought their way through the compound, encountering stronger resistance than anyone had anticipated. The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly. Intelligence reports had suggested the target maintained a small security force, but the reality proved far different. The compound housed nearly 30 armed fighters, many equipped with heavy weapons and organized into effective defensive positions. Morrison's team found themselves outnumbered and facing prepared positions that had been constructed specifically to repel assault forces. Viper 1, we need immediate close air support. Ghost's voice came through the radio, urgency evident despite his professional composure. Enemy positions in the north building are preventing our advance. Sarah responded immediately, bringing the helicopter into an attack profile that would allow her to engage the specified targets. The night vision systems revealed enemy fighters positioned in windows and doorways, their weapons trained on approaches the SEAL team needed to use. Eliminating these positions would require precise fire that neutralized threats without endangering the friendly forces operating nearby. The engagement tested every aspect of Sarah's training and experience. Flying close air support in mountainous terrain at night required split-second timing and absolute precision. The helicopter's weapons systems responded to her commands, sending precisely aimed fire into enemy positions while she simultaneously maneuvered to avoid return fire and maintain visual contact with Morrison's team. The battle for the compound lasted 45 minutes, with Sarah providing continuous support as the SEAL team fought their way through increasingly desperate resistance. Enemy fighters seemed determined to prevent any intelligence materials from being captured, fighting with suicidal intensity that suggested the compound contained information of exceptional value. Eventually, Morrison's team succeeded in clearing the compound and securing their primary objective. The high-value target had been killed during the initial assault, but the intelligence materials recovered from the site would prove invaluable for future operations. However, the extended firefight had compromised their position, and enemy reinforcements were reportedly en route to the area. Viper 1, we need immediate extraction, Morrison reported. Enemy vehicles approaching from multiple directions. Estimate 15 minutes until they arrive in force. Sarah had already identified this possibility and positioned herself for rapid extraction. The landing zone at the compound was smaller than ideal and surrounded by obstacles that would make the approach challenging, but it was the only option available given the time constraints. She began her descent immediately, knowing that speed was essential to avoid being caught on the ground by arriving enemy forces. The extraction proved even more challenging than the insertion had been. Enemy fighters continued to engage from concealed positions around the compound, while Sarah maneuvered the helicopter into the confined landing zone. Automatic weapons fire sparked off the aircraft's armored hull as Morrison's team fought their way to the extraction point, carrying captured intelligence materials and supporting 2 wounded team members. As the SEAL team boarded her aircraft, Sarah could see vehicle lights approaching through the mountain passes. Enemy reinforcements were arriving faster than intelligence had predicted, and their heavy weapons would make remaining in the area extremely dangerous. She lifted off immediately, climbing away from the compound as rocket-propelled grenades and heavy machine gun fire filled the air around them. The escape from the target area required flying through a gauntlet of hostile fire that tested every aspect of Sarah's skill as a pilot. Enemy forces had established positions along the likely escape routes, forcing her to improvise alternative paths through terrain that pushed her aircraft to its operational limits. The helicopter shuddered under the impact of multiple hits while she maneuvered through narrow valleys at maximum speed. Behind her, Morrison's team provided what support they could, returning fire through the helicopter's open doors while Ghost coordinated with overhead surveillance assets to identify threats along their escape route. The wounded team members received medical attention from Vortex, whose calm professionalism under fire impressed Sarah even as she focused on flying them all to safety. The flight to the extraction point would take 30 minutes through some of the most dangerous airspace in the region, with enemy forces now fully alerted to their presence and actively attempting to intercept them. Sarah knew that the next half hour would determine whether this mission ended in success or tragedy, and she was determined to ensure that everyone aboard her aircraft made it home safely. The helicopter streaked through the mountain valleys at maximum speed, its engines straining against the thin air and the additional weight of battle damage. Sarah could feel the aircraft's response becoming sluggish as hydraulic fluid leaked from damaged systems, making each control input require more effort and concentration. Behind her, Morrison's team worked frantically to treat their wounded while monitoring radio frequencies for signs of pursuing forces. The 2 wounded SEALs, Hammer and Phoenix, had sustained injuries during the final stages of the compound assault. Hammer had taken shrapnel to his left leg when an enemy grenade exploded near his position, while Phoenix suffered a gunshot wound to his shoulder that had damaged muscle and bone. Vortex worked with practiced efficiency to stabilize both men, using the helicopter's medical kit and supplies from his own gear to control bleeding and manage pain. Sarah's primary concern was reaching the designated extraction point before enemy forces could organize an effective intercept. Intelligence reports indicated that hostile aircraft were being scrambled from bases throughout the region, while ground forces moved to block known escape routes. The window for safe extraction was closing rapidly, and every minute of delay increased the risk of catastrophic engagement. The damaged helicopter systems complicated every aspect of the flight. The hydraulic leak had reduced the effectiveness of the flight controls, requiring Sarah to constantly adjust her technique to maintain proper aircraft attitude. More troubling was the intermittent failure of several electronic systems, including some navigation equipment that would be crucial for flying through the mountainous terrain in darkness. Viper 1, this is Control, came the voice of the mission commander through Sarah's headset. We're showing multiple hostile aircraft airborne in your area. You need to alter course to avoid interception. Sarah studied her navigation display, identifying the suggested route change that would take them through even more challenging terrain, but away from the approaching enemy fighters. The new path would add 15 minutes to their flight time while requiring navigation through valleys that barely provided clearance for her rotor diameter. With damaged flight controls and failing navigation equipment, the route change represented a significant risk. Control, Viper 1 copies, Sarah responded. Be advised aircraft systems are degraded. Request vector to nearest friendly forces. The response came immediately from Morrison, who had been monitoring the communication. Viper 1, we have a contingency plan. There's a coalition forward operating base approximately 20 minutes southeast of our current position. It's not ideal, but it's closer than our primary extraction point. Sarah quickly calculated the implications of this alternative. The forward operating base would provide medical facilities for the wounded team members and security from pursuing forces, but reaching it would require flying through an area where enemy surface-to-air missile systems were known to operate. The choice came down to accepting certain risk now versus probable disaster later. Copy that, team leader. Setting course for the forward operating base. The decision made, Sarah banked the helicopter toward the southeast, accepting the increased risk in favor of reaching safety more quickly. The aircraft responded sluggishly to her control inputs, reminding her constantly of the damage sustained during the extraction. Each minute of flight brought new concerns as additional systems began showing signs of stress and potential failure. Behind her, the SEAL team maintained their professional composure despite the obvious dangers. Ghost monitored enemy communications, providing updates on hostile force movements while Morrison coordinated with the forward operating base to arrange for their emergency arrival. The wounded men endured their injuries with the stoic determination that characterized special operations personnel, refusing to let pain compromise their alertness. Ace, who had been notably quiet throughout the mission, approached Sarah's position as she navigated through a particularly narrow valley passage. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "is there anything I can do to help with the aircraft?" Sarah glanced back at him, noting the genuine concern in his expression. The young operator had clearly learned from his earlier mistakes and was now focused on contributing to their collective survival. "Monitor the hydraulic pressure gauge on that panel," she directed. "If it drops below the red line, let me know immediately." The next 20 minutes tested every aspect of Sarah's piloting skill and the team's collective resolve. Enemy aircraft swept the valleys behind them, their search patterns gradually closing in on the helicopter's position. Surface-to-air missile sites activated their tracking radars, painting brief contacts that sent warning signals through the aircraft's defensive systems. Each threat required careful maneuvering to avoid detection while maintaining course toward the forward operating base. The most dangerous moment came as they crossed a ridge line that exposed them to observation from multiple directions. Sarah had timed the crossing to coincide with the passage of enemy search aircraft, but mechanical problems with the helicopter had delayed their arrival by crucial minutes. As they crested the ridge, warning alarms announced that missile tracking radars had acquired their aircraft. "Missile launch, bearing 270. Ghost called out, his voice maintaining professional calm despite the mortal danger they faced. Sarah immediately threw the helicopter into evasive maneuvers, diving toward the valley floor while deploying countermeasures designed to confuse incoming missiles. The damaged flight controls made the maneuvers more difficult and less effective than they should have been, while the additional weight of battle damage reduced their aircraft's ability to accelerate away from threats. The surface-to-air missile streaked past their position, missing the helicopter by less than 50 meters before exploding against the mountainside behind them. Sarah continued evasive maneuvering while climbing back toward their required altitude, knowing that remaining low would expose them to additional threats from different positions. "That was too close," Morrison observed, his own experience allowing him to appreciate how narrow their escape had been. "It's not over yet," Sarah replied grimly, her attention focused on the threat warning displays that showed additional missile sites activating in their path. "We've got more of the same ahead." The approach to the forward operating base required threading a path between known missile sites while maintaining enough altitude to avoid small arms fire from ground positions. Sarah had studied the defensive layout during previous missions, but approaching at night with damaged aircraft created variables that made prediction impossible. Communication with the base had established that medical personnel and aircraft maintenance specialists would be standing by for their arrival. More importantly, fighter aircraft from the base were being scrambled to provide air cover and intercept any pursuing forces. The knowledge that friendly support was approaching provided psychological relief even as immediate dangers continued to multiply. 5 minutes from the base, Sarah's aircraft suffered a critical system failure. The main hydraulic system finally succumbed to battle damage, leaving her with only manual flight controls and significantly reduced capability. The helicopter immediately became much more difficult to control, requiring constant attention to maintain proper flight attitude and course. "We just lost main hydraulics," Sarah announced to the team. "The approach is going to be interesting." Landing a helicopter with manual controls under ideal conditions required exceptional skill and concentration. Attempting such a landing at night, with battle damage and wounded personnel aboard, represented the kind of challenge that separated exceptional pilots from merely competent ones. Sarah had trained for this scenario countless times, but real-world application always carried uncertainties that simulations could not replicate. Vortex moved forward from his position, treating the wounded SEALs. "How can we help?" he asked, understanding that their survival might depend on actions taken in the next few minutes. "I need everyone secured and ready for a hard landing," Sarah replied. "Make sure the wounded are properly immobilized. This approach won't be smooth." As they approached the forward operating base, Sarah could see the runway lights cutting through the darkness like a beacon of safety. Air traffic control had cleared all other aircraft from the pattern, giving her priority for immediate landing. Medical vehicles and fire equipment were positioned near the runway, ready to respond if the landing resulted in further casualties. The approach required every technique Sarah had learned during her career, combined with improvised solutions to problems created by the battle damage. The helicopter wallowed through the air like a wounded bird, responding slowly to control inputs and requiring constant correction to maintain proper glide path. Each moment brought new challenges as additional systems failed or operated at degraded capability. "Base in sight," Morrison reported, his voice carrying relief as the lights of the forward operating base became visible through the darkness. "Roger that," Sarah responded, her attention focused entirely on the complex task of bringing the damaged aircraft safely to the ground. "Everyone hold on. This is going to be rough." The final approach tested the limits of both pilot skill and aircraft capability. Sarah managed the descent with careful attention to airspeed and altitude, knowing that any mistake at this stage would be catastrophic for everyone aboard. The helicopter shuddered and vibrated as it settled toward the runway, its damaged systems protesting the demands being placed upon them. Ground contact came with a jarring impact that threw everyone forward against their restraints. The helicopter bounced twice before settling onto the runway with a grinding noise that suggested significant structural damage. But they were down, they were alive, and they were safe within the perimeter of friendly forces. Medical personnel swarmed the aircraft before the rotors had stopped spinning, rushing to treat Hammer and Phoenix while other specialists began assessing the helicopter's damage. Morrison's team quickly offloaded their captured intelligence materials, ensuring that the mission's primary objectives would be preserved even if the aircraft proved to be a total loss. Sarah shut down the remaining systems and sat back in her pilot's seat, feeling the adrenaline finally beginning to fade as the immediate danger passed. The mission had been successful despite numerous complications, and everyone had survived wounds that could have been much worse. In the special operations community, any mission where everyone came home alive was considered a victory. The debriefing room at the forward operating base buzzed with quiet activity as intelligence specialists analyzed the materials recovered from the mountain compound. Sarah sat across from Morrison and his team, all of them showing the effects of their harrowing mission through exhaustion and the adrenaline crash that inevitably followed intense combat. Despite the late hour and their fatigue, the importance of capturing details while memories remained fresh meant the debriefing could not wait. Major Elizabeth Hayes, the base intelligence officer, led the session with practiced efficiency. She had conducted hundreds of such debriefings during her deployment, but the significance of this particular mission elevated the proceedings beyond routine documentation. The intelligence materials recovered by Morrison's team had already provided crucial insights into enemy operations, validating the risks taken to obtain them. "Let's start with the initial approach and insertion," Major Hayes began, her tablet ready to record every detail. "Were there any indications that enemy forces were aware of your presence before the assault began?" Morrison answered first, his professional demeanor unchanged despite the physical and mental stress of the mission. "Negative." The insertion proceeded according to plan with no signs of enemy surveillance or preparation. The compound appeared to be operating under normal security protocols until we initiated the assault. Sarah provided her perspective on the aviation aspects of the insertion, describing the challenging conditions and the successful concealment of their approach. The combination of terrain masking and modified helicopter systems had allowed them to reach the target area undetected, confirming the effectiveness of their operational planning. The debriefing continued with detailed examination of the assault phase, revealing information that would influence future operations in the region. The unexpected strength of enemy resistance suggested that intelligence assessments had underestimated the importance of the target compound and the resources dedicated to its defense. This discrepancy would require investigation to prevent similar surprises in future missions. Ghost provided technical details about the communications equipment and electronic warfare systems encountered at the compound. The sophistication of enemy capabilities exceeded previous estimates, indicating that hostile forces were receiving advanced equipment and training from external sources. This intelligence would help coalition forces adapt their own systems and tactics to counter emerging threats. The analysis of Sarah's close air support performance revealed both strengths and areas for improvement in their operational procedures. Her immediate response to requests for fire support had been crucial in allowing the ground team to advance through heavily defended positions, but the engagement had also exposed vulnerabilities in their coordination protocols that could be addressed through additional training. The pilot's performance was exceptional, Morrison stated when asked about aviation support during the mission. Without immediate close air support, we would have been pinned down indefinitely and probably overrun when enemy reinforcements arrived. Major Hayes turned to Sarah, her expression conveying professional respect. Your willingness to engage in close proximity to friendly forces showed exceptional skill and judgment. The gun camera footage shows precision that saved lives while eliminating key threats. The discussion of the extraction phase revealed the complex challenges faced when aircraft systems began failing under combat stress. Sarah's ability to continue flying with degraded equipment while navigating through hostile territory had prevented the mission from ending in disaster. Her decision-making process during the emergency provided valuable lessons for other pilots who might face similar situations. Ace, who had remained largely quiet during the debriefing, finally spoke when asked about team dynamics during the mission. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Sarah directly, "I want to state for the record that your performance was outstanding. My earlier comments were unprofessional and unfounded." The formal acknowledgement carried weight beyond simple apology. In the special operations community, public recognition of professional competence represented significant validation, particularly when it came from someone who had initially expressed doubt. Ace's willingness to acknowledge his mistake demonstrated personal growth and professional maturity. As the debriefing concluded, Major Hayes summarized the mission's achievements and their broader significance. The intelligence materials recovered from the compound had already provided actionable information for upcoming operations, while the elimination of the high-value target had disrupted enemy coordination efforts throughout the region. The successful completion of the mission despite unexpected challenges demonstrated the effectiveness of joint special operations tactics. The mission will be classified as a complete success, Major Hayes announced. All primary and secondary objectives were achieved, and the intelligence gathered will support operations for months to come. Following the formal debriefing, Morrison's team gathered in the base's recreation area to decompress and process their shared experience. This informal time was as important as the official proceedings, allowing the operators to discuss personal impressions and build the bonds that made their dangerous work possible. Sarah found herself included in these discussions as a full team member rather than external support, a recognition that her performance had earned their complete acceptance. The conversation ranged from tactical analysis to lighter topics that helped everyone transition away from the intense focus required during combat operations. "You know," Ghost said during a pause in the conversation, "I've worked with a lot of pilots over the years, but I've never seen anyone fly like that under pressure. The way you threaded that helicopter through those valleys while taking fire was incredible." The recognition meant something to Sarah, coming from operators whose own skills were beyond question. Throughout her career, she had sought this kind of professional acceptance, the acknowledgement that she belonged among the elite warriors who risked everything for their missions and their teammates. Hammer and Phoenix, despite their injuries, insisted on participating in the informal debriefing from their medical beds. Their wounds would require several weeks of recovery, but both would make full recoveries and return to operational status. Their determination to remain part of the team, even while injured, exemplified the dedication that made special operations units effective. Over the following days, as they waited for transportation back to their home base, Sarah learned more about the individual stories that had brought each team member to SEAL Team 6. Morrison had been an operator for over 15 years, surviving multiple deployments and rising through the ranks based on exceptional leadership and tactical skill. Ghost had started as a communications specialist in conventional forces before earning his place among special operations through demonstrated competence and reliability. The stories revealed the human side of warriors who often seemed larger than life, showing the personal sacrifices and dedicated preparation that enabled their professional success. Sarah recognized similar themes in her own career, the choices and commitments that had shaped her path toward this moment of acceptance among America's military elite. The damaged helicopter could not be repaired at the forward operating base, requiring specialized parts and expertise available only at major maintenance facilities. Sarah would return to base aboard a transport aircraft while her damaged aircraft was eventually recovered for analysis and repair. The battle damage it had sustained told the story of their mission in scratches, holes, and failed systems that bore witness to the intensity of their engagement. As their departure approached, Morrison made an announcement that surprised everyone, including Sarah herself. "I've been authorized to extend an invitation," he said formally. "Command wants to know if you would be interested in a permanent assignment to our aviation support unit." The offer represented the opportunity Sarah had been seeking throughout her career, the chance to return to operational flying with one of the military's most elite units. Assignment to support SEAL Team 6 would mean regular combat missions, challenging operations, and the opportunity to work with the best personnel in the special operations community. "I'm interested," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Very interested." The return journey to Coronado took place aboard a military transport aircraft, giving the team time to rest and reflect on their shared experience. Sarah found herself looking forward to the possibility of working with these operators on a regular basis, contributing her skills to missions that would test every aspect of her training and experience. As the aircraft approached the California coastline, Sarah thought about the events that had brought her to this moment. The Syria mission that had earned her the call sign Viper 1 had seemed like a career-ending decision at the time, but it had ultimately led to this opportunity to prove herself among the military's elite. Sometimes the most difficult choices created unexpected paths to success. Morrison approached her during the final hour of the flight, carrying a small package that he handed to her with ceremonial formality. "From the team," he said simply. Inside the package was a patch bearing the SEAL Team 6 insignia, modified with the words Viper 1, embroidered beneath the traditional design. The gift represented acceptance that went beyond professional recognition, acknowledging her as someone who had earned her place among warriors who accepted nothing less than excellence. "Welcome to the team," Morrison said, extending his hand in a gesture that carried years of shared danger and mutual respect. As the aircraft touched down at Coronado, Sarah realized that her career had reached a turning point that would define everything that followed. The young pilot who had once been disciplined for disobeying orders had evolved into someone whose judgment and skills were trusted by America's most elite warriors. The journey had been challenging, but it had led to exactly where she belonged. The nickname Viper 1 would continue to represent the deadly precision and unwavering commitment that Sarah brought to every mission. But now it would also represent her place among the special operations community, a recognition that she had earned through actions that spoke louder than any words. In a world where reputation was everything and trust was earned through shared danger, Sarah Mitchell had found her place among the elite.